Questions to the Prime Minister. Naomi Long.
Question number 1, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, I've been asked to reply on behalf of my right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, who is visiting Israel and the occupied Palestinian territories. Mr. Speaker, I'm sure the whole House will wish to join me in paying tribute to Sapper Adam Morley from 32 Engineer Regiment, who tragically died in Camp Bastion on the 5th of March. He'll be greatly missed by his family and friends, and our deepest sympathies are with them at this time. Mr. Speaker, on a happier note, I'm sure the whole House would also like to join me in paying tribute to our first Team GB Winter Paralympic gold medal winner, Kelly Gallagher, and her teammate, Jade Etherington, who's also won silver and bronze medals at the Sochi Games. And I, of course, wish to send the best of luck to the other Team GB competitors. Mr. Speaker, this morning I had meetings with ministerial colleagues and others in addition to my duties in this House. I shall have further such meetings later today.
Naomi Long.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and if I could too add my sympathies and thoughts and prayers to the family of Sapper Morley, and my congratulations to Kelly Gallagher from Northern Ireland, of course, who competed and won the first medal. Mr. Speaker, given rising racism and xenophobia, including recent racist attacks in my own East Belfast constituency, what more can government do to ensure that the public debate on issues such as EU membership and on immigration are more balanced and celebrate the huge positive contribution to both the social, cultural and economic life of the UK, particularly in the run-up to the European elections?
Mr. Speaker, of course I agree with her. We need to strike the right balance between explaining to the public that we are running a tough but firm immigration system where it needs to be tough and firm, but also open to those who want to come here, make a contribution, pay their taxes and contribute to our way of life. I was deeply saddened and shocked to hear about the incidents of what had happened to members of the Polish and Chinese community in her constituency, and even more so of what's happened to her colleague, Anna Lowe, MLA, who I understand is the first member of Chinese descent in any legislature in Europe, who's also been subject to terrible abuse by bullies and racists. And I rang her a few weeks ago to express my own support for what she's doing to stand up against that terrible treatment.
Sir Alan Beath.
Mr. Speaker, since a £700 tax cut, free school meals and the pupil premium will improve the opportunities and lives of many of my constituents, even though these ideas were not entirely welcome to some among our coalition partners, will he welcome the fact that coalition government and the compromises that go with it can deliver sound policies?
Yes, I strongly agree with him, especially on all those policies. And one of them, as he will know, is in the papers this morning because of the slightly inexplicable views of an entirely unknown, if highly opinionated, ex-party advisor to the Conservative Party about free school meals. Free school meals, when they're delivered for those at infant school in September, will save families money, will improve the health of children, and will improve educational outcomes. Instead of denigrating that policy, we should be celebrating it.
Harriet Harman.
I'd like to join the Deputy Prime Minister in paying tribute to Sapper Adam Morley from 32 Engineer Regiment. We honour his bravery and service, but above all, send our deepest condolences to his family and friends who mourn him. I join the Deputy Prime Minister too in congratulating our Paralympic medal winners and wish all Team GB the best of luck in the rest of the Games. Mr. Speaker, at the last general election, the Deputy Prime Minister said that local people should have more control over their health services. Can he explain to the House and the public why last night he voted against that?
Actually, we voted for measures which would ensure that there is local consultation, that people ask me to. But I have to say, I'm intrigued by her line of inquiry, given their record in the NHS. We don't need to look any further than what's happening in Wales, where they haven't met their target since 2009. It was that party opposite, when in government, that entered into a succession of sweetheart deals, covert privatisation of large parts of our NHS. I really don't think, after the Francis report and all the other revelations of what happened in the NHS under Labour, they've got much to stand on.
Harriet Harman.
Even prepared to justify what he voted on last night, because the truth Secretary broke the law which gave local people a say, so decided to change the law. And the Lib Dems could have stepped in and stopped it. But oh no, here's what they did instead. First, they said they were against the change. Then they put down an amendment. Then they sold out to the Tories, and the Tories got their way again. Is there any logic to how the Lib Dems vote other than self-interest?
Mr. Speaker, this from a party that spent £250 million, £250 million on sweetheart deals for the private sector, which led to operations and procedures which didn't help a single patient. A party which now rants and rails against competition in the NHS, but actually introduced it. A party which suffers from collective amnesia about the terrible suffering of the patients in Mid Staffordshire and other parts of the NHS, mismanaged by them.
Hospitals are under threat, and they want to say people will remember what the Deputy Prime Minister said in the House today. At their spring conference last week, Lib Dem ministers were falling over themselves to denounce government policies, and even their own departmental colleagues, describing them variously as unfair, absurd and hated. Yet they keep supporting them. Take the bedroom tax. His own party president says the bedroom tax is wrong, unnecessary and causing misery. But they voted for it. Now they say they want to abolish it. Are they for the bedroom tax or against it? Which is it?
Mr. Speaker, there are 1.7 million people on the housing waiting list in the country, in our country, and there are 1.5 million spare bedrooms. That is a problem we inherited, like so many problems, from them. On this side of the House, we're trying to sort out the mess that they created. If they are incapable of taking any responsibility or expressing any apology for the mess they've created, why should we take any of our questions seriously at all?
Harriet Harman.
They're for it, and only Labour will scrap the bedroom tax. The Lib Dem Chief Secretary to the Treasury said cutting the top rate of tax would be cloud cuckoo land. If the Lib Dems were against this tax cut, why did they vote for it?
Speaker, guess what the top rate of tax was under Labour? Anybody? Anybody? Was it 50? Was it 40? Anybody? 40p for 13 years. And now she's complaining there's 5p higher. Honestly, if she's going to try and suggest, if she's going to try and make consistency a virtue, how about this, Mr. Speaker? This week, the Labour Party's been talking about the need to give young people jobs opportunities. Last week, they tabled an amendment to the deregulation bill, which will tell 500,000 young apprentices on level 2 apprentices that they're no longer apprentices. And worse than that, they issued a report a few months ago that says that hundreds of thousands of youngsters on level 2 apprentices are, get this, dead weight. What a kick in the teeth for the young people we should be helping onto apprenticeships.
Harriet Harman.
We'll have a banker's bonus tax for youth jobs because youth unemployment has doubled.
As we're interrupting the Right Honourable and Learned Lady, when both principals have been at the dispatch box, there's been far too much noise. People ought to be able to hear the questions and hear the answers. Whether members respect each other, they ought to respect the public. Harriet Harman.
Long-term youth unemployment has doubled under his government. And with so many people struggling to make ends meet and many even driven to relying on food banks, it's an absolute disgrace that the Lib Dems voted through a tax cut for the richest. Mr. Speaker, on Sunday, the Deputy Prime Minister shared with us everything he loves about Britain. He loves his cup of tea. He loves the shipping forecast, and he loves flip-flops. Not so much footwear for the Deputy Prime Minister, I think, but certainly a way of life. With his posturing, with his broken promises and posturing, doesn't and he realised that he might love Britain, but Britain does not love him back.
Mr. Speaker, the punchline was a long time in the delivery, and it wasn't really worth waiting for. I know she doesn't like to get. I know she doesn't want the facts to get in the way of a pre-prepared joke. But how about this? Youth unemployment is lower now than it was when we came into office. In her last year in office, 1 million more people in relative poverty than there are now, 500,000 more children in relative poverty than there are now, 150,000 more people unemployed than there are now, and 25,000 more young people unemployed. What we know is they're the party of 40p. They're the party of sweetheart deals for the private sector and the NHS. They're the party of Fred Goodwin, and now they're the party against apprenticeships.
What he's shown is that he's siding with the Tories and is totally out of touch. So whatever was said last weekend, no one is going to be fooled by the Lib Dems' phony rows with the Tories when week in, week out, they're justifying them at the dispatch box and trotting through the lobbies with the Tories. They used to talk about two parties coming together in the national interest. Now they're two parties bound together by a mutual terror of the electorate.
Mr. Speaker, however she wishes to characterise things, she has a record which she needs to defend, of boom and bust, of sucking up to the city and presiding...
Order! Order! The Deputy Prime Minister's response must be heard. The Right Honourable Gentleman.
A record of an increase in relative poverty, an increase in unemployment, an increase in youth unemployment, and bequeathing to this generation the country's worst peacetime deficit ever. Is that really a record that she is proud of? As ever, we're clearing up the mess that she left behind.
Sir Andrew George.
Mr. Speaker, the government's response to the recent storm damage to help fishermen and restore the link Dawlish is very much appreciated, but the severe damage to Penzance Scilly and the vital lifeline transport links to the Isles of Scilly has largely gone unnoticed and is not something which local authorities can resolve entirely on their own. Will the Deputy Prime Minister ensure that a delegation from my constituency can meet the appropriate ministers and officials so that we can seek the support necessary in order to find a long-term and resilient solution to this problem?
Mr. Speaker, I visited his constituency to see for myself and hear for myself the damage done to many communities by the terrible floods and the extreme weather in recent times. And I know how long he's been campaigning on this issue. I will ensure that that meeting does take place with the relevant minister in government.
Ms. Robertson.
Speaker, and this week surely it's also right to extend condolences to the family and friends of Bob Crow. The Secretary of State for Defence has issued a ministerial correction where he corrects the falsehood that there was no measurable change in the radiation discharge at HMS Vulcan near Dounreay. Does the Deputy Prime Minister agree that the Ministry of Defence should be fully answerable to the Scottish Environmental Protection Agency?
I'd of course like to also join expressing my condolences to the family and friends of Bob Crow, whether you agreed with him or not. He was someone always of forthright views, and he always worked tirelessly for what he believed in and the people he represented. On the issue of Dounreay, I think the Ministry of Defence has sought to be as open as possible. It's very important that all of us work together in order to ensure that the nuclear deterrent is managed and maintained safely, and that is exactly what everyone is seeking to do.
Bone.
Mr. Speaker, we now know that the Leader of the Opposition is opposed to an EU referendum and won't deliver one. The Deputy Prime Minister is opposed to an EU referendum and won't deliver one. The Leader of the UKIP party wants an EU referendum but can't deliver one. The Prime Minister wants an EU referendum and will deliver it by 2017. Would the stand-in Prime Minister tell the House which of the party leaders trusts the British people and is a real Democrat?
Mr. Speaker, as ever, a pleasure. I'm glad to see he has fans on the other side of the House now, as well as Mr. Speaker, since he mentions my right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, let me quote what he said at this dispatch box just a couple of years ago when we voted together on this very issue. And he said, and I quote, "My clear view is that it is when this Parliament proposes to give up powers that there should be a referendum. That is the guarantee we've written into law. It is important that we establish clear rules for the use of referendums in a parliamentary democracy. Rule 1, line 1 is, if you're giving up powers that belong to the British people, you should ask them first." I entirely agree. That was the government's position then. That's what we legislated on, and that remains my view.
Mr. Ronnie Campbell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. A recent survey of the TUC reckoned that 67% of hard-working people working in the private industry will not be getting a rise this year. How does that square with the fat cats in the city and the bankers getting their big bonuses?
Mr. Speaker, the richest in society are paying more in every year of this Parliament than they did in under any year under Labour. It was his party that let the bankers run amok. It was his party, the party of Fred Goodwin, that went on a prawn cocktail charm offensive to suck up to the bankers in the first place. And they wiped off so much of the value of the British economy, it amounts to £3,000 lost to every household in the United Kingdom. Is that a record he's proud of?
Mr. John Whittingdale.
Does the Deputy Prime Minister accept that the measures that have been announced so far have had no impact on President Putin and the Russian government, who are refusing to negotiate with the Ukrainian government and continue to strengthen their hold on Crimea? Will the government now press for targeted economic sanctions against senior members of the Russian government and their supporters in order to reinforce the message that the annexation of Crimea is unacceptable and is wholly in breach of international law?
Mr. Speaker, I'm sure my honourable friend speaks for most, for everybody on all sides of the House when he says that we should seek to do everything to both deter the Russians from making the situation any worse, but also de-escalate. And that is why it is terribly important that we work together with our American allies and with countries across the European Union, and to use the collective clout of the European Union, political and economic clout, to set out, as we have done, a sort of ratchet of sanctions which can be and will be deployed if de-escalation does not happen, starting, I stress this, starting, I hope, very soon with Russian agreements to enter into a contact group so that direct talks can start between Kiev and Moscow.
Mr. Kevin Brennan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On his party's recent defeat by the bus pass Elvis candidate, couldn't the electorate's message to him be summarised by paraphrasing the words of a song by the original Elvis? You ain't nothing but a lapdog.
Mr. Speaker, at least we're not the lapdog of the bankers, which is what Labour was in office. At least we didn't crash the British economy. At least we didn't cost every household £3,000. At least we didn't preside over an increase in relative poverty. At least we didn't preside over an increase in youth unemployment. We are creating the stronger economy and fairer society that his party failed to do.
Mr. Mark Pawsey.
Deputy Prime Minister will be encouraged that the economy is growing faster than expected, showing the value of this government's long-term economic plan. Does he share my satisfaction that it's being achieved through a resurgence in manufacturing, with companies such as Automotive Insulations in my constituency, suppliers to the motor industry, who have more than doubled in size over the past 3 years and are investing in a new 65,000 square foot factory in Rugby?
I strongly agree with him. By sticking to the plan, despite all the overtures from the members opposite to abandon it, we have provided stability and growth to the British economy that otherwise would not have taken place. And in the automotive sector, we've seen spectacular success. There's now a vehicle rolling off a British production line every 20 seconds. We are producing more cars than we ever have done before. Of course, the party opposite presided over a decline in manufacturing, 3 times as great as what happened in the 1980s.
Lillian Greenwood.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last week, my constituents in Clifton North elected a new Labour councillor. Does the Deputy Prime Prime Minister think it was his party's support for the bedroom tax, the trebling of tuition fees, unfair cuts to the poorest families, or the betrayal of the NHS which led them to put Bus Pass Elvis ahead of the Liberal Democrats?
Mr. Speaker, putting Bus Pass Elvis aside for a minute, which I admit was a novel experience for us, as it no doubt was for the people of Clifton. I'm just wondering, did the Labour candidate admit to how much they'd cost every household in Clifton, £3,000? Did they admit to the fact that they allowed the bankers to run amok in 2008? Did they admit to the fact that they were the party that crashed the British economy? And did anyone on the doorstep apologise to the people of Clifton for what the Labour Party did to this country?
Geoffrey Clifton Brown.
The Cotswolds is a very special place because of the stewardship and planning. Yet, in the last year, this is threatened because of the number of applications for new houses, amounting to thousands. Localism seems to have gone out of the window, and the AONB is simply not being protected. What can my right honourable friend do to help resolve this?
Mr. Speaker, I know my honourable friend feels very strongly about this, and there are, of course, strong planning protections in place for areas of outstanding natural beauty, which are some of this country's most important treasures, as he quite rightly said. The National Planning Policy Framework makes clear that great weight should be given to conserving areas of outstanding natural beauty, which have the highest levels of protection, and we announced only last week, you might be interested to know, that areas of outstanding natural beauty in national parks will be excluded from new legislation allowing agricultural buildings to be converted to housing without the need for planning application.
Lady Alexander.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can the Deputy Prime Minister confirm that if the independent review body on health service staff pay recommends an increase, the government will accept that advice, or will they freeze the pay of some of the lowest earners in the NHS for yet another year?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I think what most people want is for us to. We will make the announcement shortly about our views on the pay review body recommendations. But what you want is to protect what is now the highest number of nurses employed in the NHS since the NHS was founded, and we need to make sure the NHS continues to employ more rather than the fewer clinical staff that are employed under Labour to ensure that patients get the best possible treatment under the NHS.
Andrew Salu.
On Monday, South Korean newspapers said that North Korea was due to execute 33 people for having had contact with a Christian missionary. Given that there are 250,000 people in North Korean prison camps, would the Deputy Prime Minister urge the BBC World Service to use its existing transmitters to broadcast into North Korea, especially as more and more North Koreans are now having access to radios?
Mr. Speaker, he raises a very important issue, and as he knows, our embassy in Pyongyang continues to engage critically with the North Korean regime and tries to ensure that there are as many opportunities for dialogue as possible, including information coming into the country. The BBC World Service is, of course, operationally, editorially and managerially independent. I understand that at the end of last year they decided, following a review, that they couldn't continue to offer an effective and affordable Korean language service. That, of course, is a matter for the BBC World Service itself.
Mr. Toby Perkins.
Very much, Mr. Speaker. Victoria Liggett of Staveley died after GPs missed several chances to spot her cancer. She's the most serious victim of the failure of the Hollywell Medical Group in Chesterfield. But she and 20,000 other patients there who are desperately trying to get an appointment are also victims, aren't they, of the Deputy Prime Minister's shameless, spineless capitulation to the Tories on the NHS?
Mr. Speaker, as I pointed out earlier, he might not know this, but it was his party that wasted £250 million of taxpayers' money on sweetheart deals with the private sector to undermine the NHS, on tariffs which the NHS could not meet, for operations which weren't delivered. While he's asking a question, why can't he tell the House why he tabled the amendment just last week to tell 500,000 youngsters that they can no longer be called apprentices? We stand up for fairness, we stand up for a strong NHS, he doesn't.
Mr. Mr. David T.C. Davis.
Mr. Speaker, has the Deputy Prime Minister read the testimony of Mariana Robson in yesterday's Western Mail, a victim of the Labour-run NHS in Wales? Does he have sympathy with all those suffering on longer waiting lists and with less access to drugs? And does he agree it's time to give them the opportunity to access the far higher services which are being delivered by this coalition government for NHS patients in England?
Mr. Speaker, I was appalled. I'm sure everybody would be appalled about the experiences of one of the honourable gentleman's constituents. In Wales, the NHS there, run by Labour, 33% of patients wait more than 8 weeks to access diagnostics. So 33%, a third. In England, only just over 1% of patients wait longer than 6 weeks for the same. I think the comparison speaks for itself.
John Woodcock.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This week marks 3 years since the bloodshed began in Syria. More than 2.5 million people have fled the country, and the dead can no longer even be counted. We must all bear responsibility for our shameful failure to intervene, but they are supposed to be the ones running the country. So what renewed effort will his government make to end the slaughter before all hope fails?
Well, Mr. Speaker, he knows my own views. I felt there was a case for intervention at the time when we voted on this, and of course his party voted against it. But if he now wants to speak with his own party leadership on that matter, he's more than welcome to do so. I agree with him. The humanitarian catastrophe there is of an unimaginable scale. We must do everything we can to help. That is why I think I'm right in saying that our humanitarian effort there is now the largest that this country has ever delivered, and why also the Home Secretary and others in government are now administering, in conjunction with the United Nations, a new programme where we allow the most destitute and desperate refugees some refuge in this country as well.
Mr. Craig Whittaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. During the recent floods, the Prime Minister rightly announced grants of £5,000 for those homes flooded to put in flood defence measures in their homes. You can imagine the disappointment then of people from the 1,000 homes in the Calder Valley who were flooded only 18 months prior, who got no such support. Will the Deputy Prime Minister agree to look at this policy with the Prime Minister to see whether the same grants can be made available to those people in the Calder Valley who were flooded as well?
Of course I will do so, and as someone who witnessed the terrible flooding in my own constituency some years ago, flooding can hit different parts of the country in different ways, and we must, as we adapt to this new very difficult reality, we must make sure that we build up resilience in all parts of the country, and we provide assistance as fully and consistently as we can across the country as well.
Meg Hillier.
Mr. Speaker, the honourable member for Westmoreland agrees with me that the hated bedroom tax is causing misery for those affected. Does the Deputy Prime Minister agree with the President of his party, or his friend, the Prime Minister?
Mr. Speaker, I think, everybody thinks, that we need to deal with this mismatch between large numbers of people on the housing waiting list, something her party never did anything to address in 13 years, and the fact there are large numbers of spare bedrooms which are not being used. Her government presided over the change which we are now delivering in the social rented sector, in the private rented sector. She needs to explain why they want to support the change in one part of the housing system and not the other.
Amy Mordaunt.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Portsmouth Football Club made history by becoming the UK's largest 100% community buyout. Today, many clubs, much loved clubs, face an uncertain future due to lack of financial transparency, opaque football authority rules, a structure that promotes irresponsibility in business, and if you happen to be a women's team, doesn't promote sporting excellence. Does he agree with me we need to learn the lessons from Portsmouth, the Select Committee's report and the work of Supporters Direct, and act to protect the interests of clubs, their fans and ultimately the national game?
I certainly agree with her, and I think football fans across the country do, that this is a really important issue. We can't just have sort of big money hollow out the game that everybody loves. I know this is something that my right honourable friend, the Secretary of State for Culture, Media and Sport, is looking at on an ongoing basis, and I would strongly urge her to take up this issue with her. It's certainly something which we need to keep a close eye on so that sports clubs, large and small, can thrive in our country.
Ian Lucas.
There are reports that the Department for Work and Pensions is proposing stopping paying benefits into the Post Office card account. Does the Deputy Prime Minister support that policy?
I don't think that is true, and I will certainly, of course, confirm it with him, but that is not something which I am aware of.
Caroline Noakes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last Thursday, 16-year-old Sam Mangoro from Romsey collapsed in a school PE lesson. One of the reasons he is still alive is because the excellent Mountbatten School already had a defibrillator. They've ordered 2 more. What steps is my right honourable friend prepared to take to encourage more schools to make sure that they have defibrillators? And will he commend the work of the excellent OK Foundation, who've been leading the way on this issue?
I've certainly, and I'm sure many honourable members across the House have also come across this issue in schools and sporting clubs and other recreational facilities in their own constituencies. There's some great organisations, she mentions one of them, who's promoting the need to make defibrillators more available, and I certainly think we should all work with those campaign groups to raise the profile of this important issue.
Lucy Powell.
Report out last week showing that the average nursery cost is now higher than the average mortgage, and that childcare costs have risen 5 times faster than wages since the election. Given that we are expecting his long-awaited tax-free childcare scheme to be announced very soon, can I ask him what discussions he has had about the relationship of this scheme with universal credit and the cliff edges it creates, and also what assessment he has made of this scheme and its impact on price inflation?
Mrs. Meek, she raises a very important issue. As it happens, childcare costs are finally starting to come down in England. They continue to go up, of course, in Labour-run Wales. We must do all we can. We must do all we can to help parents and families with these costs. That's why we're delivering 15 hours of free childcare to all 3- and 4-year-olds in the country for and preschool support, and for the first time ever to 2-year-olds from the most deprived families. But you're right, she's right, that of course we need to do more. That's why we'll announce shortly the details of the tax-free childcare offer, which will benefit many, many families with these very high costs across the country.
Order.